Hi, everyone. I'm Selena Rezvani, and you're joining Women and Work Culture. This is a live stream all about helping companies make bold bets on their female talent because your business depends on it. I am so excited to be talking today about a topic close to my heart, and that's supporting women of color at work. And I'm doing that with the go-to expert on this subject and a great friend of mine, Ruchika Tulshyan. Welcome.
Selena, thank you so much for having me. And hi, everyone. It's so nice to meet you. Even though we don't get to see each other, know that I feel your energy. So thanks for joining us.
That's so awesome. We're so happy to have you here. I've been looking forward to this for so long. And I also want to welcome our wonderful community. It's so good to see you, familiar faces, new faces each week, so we can kind of level up our leadership, equity work together, right? And we already see Zivane from Harare, Zimbabwe, Chari from Charlotte, Anahita from New York. Hi, Michelle from Philly, and Nisa from Tampa Bay. We're so excited to see you all. If you haven't already, drop us a note and let us know where you're joining from. So let me tell you all a little bit about the magic that is Ruchika, because there's a lot. She is.
Must you do this?
I must. She is an inclusion strategist. She's a keynoter. She's author of the book, The Diversity Advantage, Fixing Gender Inequality in the Workplace. She's also the CEO and founder of Candour. That's her company, HQ'd in Seattle. And she advises global brands that you've heard of to be more inclusive workplaces. She's written some terrific bylines for Harvard Business Review, really insightful about small ways and big ways we can show up and better include our colleagues. And get this, we were just talking about it. In 2019, Ruchika was selected for Thinkers 50 Radar. If you don't know that list, my friends, that's kind of the Oscars of the business world. So we were exploding with pride over here in Philadelphia to see you get that awesome kind of recognition last year. And on top of all that, she teaches at Seattle University in the communications department as a distinguished professional in residence. Love that. Pretty fierce.
No gray hair, but
I love it. And hi, Pamela from Round Rock, Jasmine from France. We're so happy to see you. As we go, friends, we're going to dive in a moment. Send us your questions for Ruchika about supporting women of color at work, or about being seen and heard more yourself, right? Because that's really important too. So I want to dive in, Ruchika, and just ask you, you're clearly so vocal and passionate about women of color and advocating for them at work. What got you invested in this in the first place? Why this field?
Yeah, so it actually started with a little bit of my own challenge in the workplace. And I was a business journalist and I loved what I did. And, it started rankling at me. Why am I only interviewing male business leaders? Why am I only interviewing male CEOs? And, how come I'm covering these awesome companies around the world? I've been a journalist around the world. And why am I not, seeing more women? So it was there at the back of my mind, but actually spending time in corporate America, in the technology industry, really brought it to the fore that, we're hemorrhaging women, we're hemorrhaging these awesome, really incredible, really smart, talented, ambitious women, and for me, it felt like there was a disconnect there because the advice was, you need to lean in, you need to be more confident. And what I was seeing was these really awesome, confident women, including myself, getting pushback when we did that. And I think that somewhere there needed to be a way to bridge that disconnect, this idea that, women are lacking somehow. So I became really passionate about investigating that. My book came out in 2015. Probably a little bit early for its time. It was around the time Hillary Clinton was had announced her candidacy, and we know what happened as a result. And I think then there was just this groundswell of energy. What's holding women back? It's actually systemic biases. It's actually structural issues. I will be the first to admit and be honest about this, and my students tell me off all the time every year, that my book wasn't intersectional, and I don't think I really. And this tells you of my privilege, right? When I talk to Black women, they say, I've never had a moment where I've not had to think about being a woman of color. But for myself and the story of many immigrants, and I'm a first generation immigrant. I actually moved to the United States as an adult. I just, in my mind, I was like, no, if I work hard and I work smart and I'm confident and I negotiate well, then I can win. And I didn't realize or fully come to accept how much that intersection of my gender identity and my racial background would impact my experience in the workplace. And the more I investigate, it becomes clearer and clearer. We have academic data, we have lived experiences that just shows that women of color have an exceedingly difficult time in the workplace. And there's a lot of things we all can do, right? Include women of color, our champions and our allies, business leaders. There's a lot to be done. And that's really where my passion is now.
Yeah, well, you're getting a lot of love for those comments. And I hope you'll take that time with a teaspoon of sugar and a grain of salt, right? That your book was that way. I know the same case for my books, not necessarily looking with that intersectional lens, but I think you're underscoring something by talking about it now, which is we're all kind of in beginner mode at being more inclusive. This isn't a destination you reach. It's like a mindset of staying a beginner and staying curious and open. And just by, sharing that with us, I think you're giving us a gift and a reminder of that. So I want to go back to a comment you made that I think is a really juicy one, and it's about lean in, right? And women's movements, right? Leadership movements that have said kind of rah, rah, go get them, be aggressive, go after what you want. Talk to us about how that fell short when you think about lean in, for example. How is that incomplete?
Yeah, and there's nuance to this conversation. I'm married to a man who really enjoys negotiations and is very good at it, and it has been incredible for me to observe as in sort of as almost like a fly on the wall when it comes to negotiating mortgages and things at work, salaries, etc. And I've taken notes because what I've realized is actually men are socialized boys, and I have a boy, I have a 4-year-old toddler, and boys, and especially by the time they reach quote unquote manhood, very much socialized to ask for more, expect that they deserve more. There's a natural lean in that they have, and again, this is let's be clear. There's gender is not a binary. Very much depends on where you were born, where you're socialized, your generation. There's a lot of nuance there, but by and large, what I have seen is, men have been socialized a very certain way, and women have been socialized to be exactly the opposite. I was very much told, don't ask for more, don't be greedy,
Yes.
don't ask, and again, when we start having these conversations about whether it was Hillary Clinton's ambition back in the day, whether I know, and politics is top of mind at this moment, but or you look at Kamala Harris, or you look at Stacey Abrams, like there is a hunger that I think we have that we've been asked to suppress, right? And for really those top spots. And so I think that one challenge with movements like Lean In was, firstly, they centered white women whom are perceived in a very different way in the workplace. And there's good research to back this up. So the way that, for example, a white woman is perceived when she negotiates is often one of, yes, she's going counter to a stereotype because of gender, but her racial privilege, especially in the United States and other Western countries, will sort of carry her through. Whereas for women of color, there's really a double jeopardy there, right? And again, especially Asian women like myself, where there's this expectation of being, super grateful, super hardworking, not negotiating for more. And I face this firsthand in my own career, and we can go into that at some other time. But so where the Lean In movement and other movements like this, and I really credit the Lean In Foundation, because now they are doing the most comprehensive work around, especially Black women in the workplace. They just put out an excellent report. So there's a growth mindset that all of us need to have, and it's been awesome to see, especially the foundation sort of lean into that growth. Using sort of being funny there, but so the movement fell short, I think, really not recognizing the structural barriers. So again, I'm all for women being ambitious and leaning into that ambition, even if they have been socialized differently, which many of us have been conditioned differently. What I want to change is this side of the equation, which when women lean in, they don't reach the barrier here, which is structural bias, including racism and sexism and many other isms. And as the more intersectional conversations I have, with women of color who identify as part of the LGBTQ community, women of color with an accent, women of color, who wear a hijab, for example, I think the work is really just beginning, and we really need to dismantle this part of the barrier so women can really lean in well and truly and succeed.
So beautifully said. I love that. And all the lenses you're bringing to this, including that growth mindset, right? That we're all just waking up to the many elements here we need to see. I'm the product myself of an immigrant on one side, a white American mom on the other side, seeing the difference in treatment of a dark-skinned, man with a heavy accent, as compared to my mom, it's remarkable. It stands out. And that was a long time ago. I'd like to think we are even further along today, but I want to pivot a little bit to your consulting. I know your consulting work was kind of born out of your book, and, the great messages you put out, companies coming to you to say, where on earth do we start? Is there a good starting place for a company, a culture that's wanting to do better and think more intersectionally?
Yeah, I think there are two ways really to begin if we're starting right at the beginning. One is to really connect with your why. And I like Simon Sinek. He's a white man. He has this, this awesome sort of work around, you really need to start at the why before you move on to the how, and, where do we, who else do we bring in, the who's and whatnot. You start with the why. So I think there needs to be a real connection with the why. And that's something that I have actually written about, especially, and I'm so heartened to see the movement for racial justice in this country. And just, it tells you how overdue it was, right? And then really sparked off movements around the world. In Singapore, where I'm from, we have we have this message of racial harmony, but actually there are a lot of cracks underneath the surface. And this really helped bring those conversations to light, even in Singapore, about racism. So I was very heartened, despite the huge, the pain that got us to that moment, and certainly in the middle of a pandemic. But what I really loved is seeing so many more companies step up and say, actually, we really need to stand up against structural racism. We need to dismantle it. Now, my article and really my focus on this work all this while has been start with the why. Why are you doing this? How does it relate to what you actually do? How does it relate to the products and services that you provide? And how can you really work towards dismantling, especially racial injustice in the work that you do, but especially looking at and also taking an intersectional lens, and that could be how many women of color are here, how many people of color have we promoted, what are our barriers within our organization, and why do we need to fix that? So I think that's really step 0 before you get on to doing any action work. And then step 1, which is related, is once you figure out the why, once you have a mission and sort of a way forward, I think the most important thing after that is auditing where you're at right now. And I think the worry I sometimes have is organizations want to jump into action. They want to capitalize on the moment. And the cynic in me says it's a PR move. The optimist in me says they really see, finally, they've kind of woken up to challenges that many of us agitators have been agitating for years. But without doing that introspection work, it's very difficult to really make meaningful change. And that sort of work is behind the scenes, and it's not sexy, and often it's not pleasant. When you start to realize that actually our hiring processes are broken, or the way that we promote people is wildly inequitable. We're paying, Black women very differently from white men in comparable roles. Often it's the small little moments of biases, which are, the microaggressions, which sometimes are super hard to pinpoint. So you really have to begin from that humble place of listening, learning, having a growth mindset, but really starting from where are we now, and then sort of set up a roadmap.
Well, and those microaggressions, what's so hard about them is sometimes you don't even know that was a microaggression. You just might feel uncomfortable. You might feel prickles that just went really strangely. Something doesn't feel right about that. I know that's happened to me in the workplace. That was an odd comment to make, right? It just sits strangely with you. So you're right. It's even harder to explain to another person or audit it in a company. When you yourself sometimes are searching for the words, right? Or searching for the name or the label of what just happened. I mean, it gets really difficult. You're getting a lot of love for this. And one of the questions that came up was, in a situation where there's an only, right? An only in the room, in a department or a meeting, how can you support that one person? I think that's a great question.
Great question. Firstly, I think it's really important to look at work from Nilofer Merchant, who is on the Thinkers 50. She's on the main list of, world-renowned thinkers. But she's doing incredible work around what happens when you're the only, what happens, when you're the lonely only, and the importance of really dismantling existing power structures and creating a brand new table. So that, and bringing in more with you, so you're not the only. So I think she's phenomenal, and I highly recommend her work. But back to your question, if you recognize that, there's an only in the room, I think the fact that you have awareness around that, to me, is really heartening. Because I remember for many years, I think there was this reckoning around manels, for example, like, there's a panel of 5 men. But I think even till today, I routinely get asked to attend events or I see them promoted, which are all white and lack racial diversity. So I think there's a lot in this country's history, and really the history of colonialism around the world, that has resulted in us feeling extremely awkward to talk about race and white supremacy. So I think that's something, the fact that you're recognizing that, to me, is heartening, because often people don't want to sort of acknowledge that, or it's too uncomfortable. And over time, I started realizing people don't actually see that. It happened to me. I was with a client. I had a client meeting, and my colleague, who is a white woman, and I walked out and I was like, wow, I think that went really well. And she was like, yeah, and I really loved how you really held your own, and how are you feeling? And I said, oh, I was feeling really nervous, and all of that. And she was like, yeah, and plus I understand. I can imagine being the only woman of color in the room. I think I was the only person of color as well. And I said, oh yeah, you're right. Considering I'm so deep in this work, I was just shocked that this could even happen. Sorry, my Alexa has Oh,
no problem. Talk about
activated.
Smart tech being too smart.
Smart tech being too tech. Well, maybe she's too excited to hear this conversation. But essentially, I think one of the most important points in this is this theory of amplification. And if you notice that someone is the only in the room, and maybe they're making some excellent points, I think one thing that often happens is when people are the only in the room, they become hyper invisible, especially women of color. So on one hand, they're sort of, everyone's aware of them because they're the only, for example, woman of color in the room. And then on the other hand, they often really struggle to sort of be given a voice and be able to really speak up and be really able to have their voices heard. And that's where, if you are able to amplify their voices, that's very important. So the theory of amplification kind of came or was made popular by the Obama administration, where even in the Obama administration, the women working under President Obama found that in meetings, often their voices were not heard, or their ideas were taken and sort of credited to the men in the room. So what the women started doing is they would actually, if one person made a great point, another would actually take that point, credit it to that person, and then build upon it. So Selena gives me a great, Selena has a great idea in the meeting. I would turn to her and I'd say, Selena, that was an excellent point. And as Selena said, blah, 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 and here's the way I'm adding to that. So you give credit back to the person who gave the idea, and then you sort of keep that momentum going. Sometimes people who are the only in the room will struggle to say something, or maybe after years of being, sort of not being heard, they won't contribute. So if you're able to be in a position where you can say, Selena, what do you think about this? I know you have a great idea. Can you share it? I think those are the little micro steps, the nudges that really have huge impact in the long run. One last point I wanted to make is a lot of onlys, a lot of women of color are often asked to do office housework. And I don't know
yes.
And this is one of those micro aggressions / insidious biases that are very hard to name actually and make a huge impact. I mean, research shows how much impact doing things like cleaning up after a meeting, being the person asked to order lunch. Selena, I interviewed you for this article for HBR on office housework, and how much that really impacts the career growth of women, of people of color. Certainly if you're the only, often you're the one tasked to do it. So we must say no, and we must ensure we don't assign office housework to the only.
You're so right. And I think I'm clearly not the only one here feeling that, because honestly, that's the opposite of amplification. It's the opposite. It's like a little demotion in the room. Instead of saying, that's brilliant, build on it, Ruchika, it's like saying, you're down here. This is your area of this is what you're tasked with. This is where we're going to concentrate your time. And I think you're so right. I think there's such skillful ways in Ruchika's article to deflect that work and say no, but also how to not assign it to other people in the first place, to think before you say, hey, why don't you set up the booth at the expo when we're back to expos? But,
oh my gosh.
Yes. I want to talk about kind of belonging. I know this is a word that's kind of entered the diversity and inclusion space as a third piece of the puzzle. Women of color are shown in the research to not feel as much like they belong in the workplace. Are there things you're seeing in cultures that promote that sense that I'm part of this, I fit here? What can people do?
Well, the reason why women of color don't feel like they belong or we belong is because the systems were not designed with us in mind, And even the littlest of things, I remember working in technology where events revolved around alcohol, and I didn't feel comfortable, not because I don't drink alcohol, but because for me, I knew that I'd have to walk a very different line than the guys, the dudes who were, getting drunk. I remember one, head of the organization, talking about how he got drunk on a boat, and, other people, the Coast Guard followed him, and it was so funny. And I just thought, can you imagine that being a person of color? Can you imagine that happening to someone who's Black? Like, there's just no way. So we know that the way things are, the way the rules were made or the way that workplaces were designed were not with us in mind. So 100% understand and appreciate why belonging is so hard. I think the big difference that I'm starting to see within organizations that are really understanding how this shows up is they focus on culture add. So it's less about, I'm going to try and figure out a way to fit you into the system, right? Like if we think about puzzles, often, again, specifically women of color, and that's the area of my research, we don't fit. Like the puzzle piece, we're not that missing puzzle piece. Like we are shaped completely differently. And so now the question really, and the mindset within organizations and leaders really has to be, forget the existing puzzle. Like we need to throw that out and create something where people are very different puzzle pieces. They don't fit, and that for us is a complete puzzle. And so I think we really, for people who are watching this, who are thinking about culture fit, really think about culture add, change your mindset towards culture add. What can these incredible people who have completely different experiences than the last 5 people we've hired, what are they going to bring to the table? And the answer is innovation, it's growth, it's new ideas, it's being able to saturate hopefully new customers and new markets, even globally. And I think we as a nation, I think, have struggled with this. We were built on the principles of diversity, but now we're realizing that actually when we said diversity, we really didn't mean it. And now I think I think the focus in this day and age now, at least the work I am doing, is on equity. What is keeping underrepresented people out of the organization, out of these tables, out of these cultures, right? What are those barriers, and how do we work towards fixing it?
Beautifully said. Focus on culture add. Look at the barriers. Take a long, hard look, and let it be okay that we're all kind of in our adolescence here. We are not PhDs in how to do this yet. And that's okay. That has to be okay, doesn't it? To be humble and to be that kind of beginner. I haven't seen a ton of good news in the headlines. I don't know about you, Ruchika, but I haven't lately. And so I was very excited to see some good news in your headlines, which was that you have a book in the works, book number 2.
I thought you were talking about Kamala Harris.
Look, there are some bright spots that I'm excited about, but this is a bright spot for you in particular that I'm really thrilled about. Will you give us a little teaser about this exciting book you're writing, number 2?
Yeah, great question. So I am working on a book about the experiences of women of color in the workplace, and what are some inclusion strategies that managers and leaders can employ. And I think what I am excited about with this book is I'm trying to gear it towards everyone. And publishers will always say, like, pick your person, pick your audience. I'm really trying to gear this to everyone. So I hope women of color feel seen. I'm using data, case strategies, case studies, strategies, and then also lived experiences of women of color to illustrate what exclusion looks like, and then giving folks tangible advice, research-based advice on how they can be more inclusive to women of color.
Beautiful. We need this. And I know you're data-driven, which I really appreciate. And I think a lot of readers will appreciate. This comes from all of your research. You have one more question, with your permission, that I'd like to ask you that came in from the lovely Valerine. How does a woman of color who's not being paid equitably in comparison to her team bring this up with management so it can be corrected?
Yeah, again, back to, I hate that you have to be the one to do this, because my focus is always on leaders running pay audits and ensuring that that everyone is being paid equitably for the work that they do. My number one thing is the data. If you have data to back this up, I would absolutely bring that to the organization and say, I have data to show that I'm not being paid equitably, right? The other part, which sometimes is, sometimes that the reasonable experience or the reasonable answer with logic isn't always the thing that works. And for that, and to safeguard that, I really recommend finding allies, right? Like, who are your allies within the organization, whom you can talk to, who can back you up as you have that pretty challenging conversation, right? I would also look for leaders who have demonstrated the most growth mindset and mindset towards inclusion. So if you know a person, even if your VP of HR isn't that person, but actually it's your CMO or your chief, hopefully diversity and inclusion officer or someone else, I would definitely go there first, and I would say, here's this data point I have. This really needs to be fixed. Would love to have you on my side. I know that you have the influence. I know you want to do the right thing. I've heard you talk about this. So would you be able to back me up when I go to the person who can actually fix this? So those are my two quick tips. It's frustrating. And honestly, if you have this conversation and you don't, feel supported and not, you're not seen because this organization doesn't seem to care about pay equity. Sometimes I tell women, and especially women of color, you just got to leave.
Yeah, right. And kind of giving yourself that out, right? That out. Sometimes you move up by moving out. And so many women and women of color have said that, sometimes Absolutely. You're going to accelerate where you can go. That's great. And very helpful. So you got to get comfortable talking about money as part of this equation, which I'm a big proponent of, as awkward and cringy as it feels to so many of us to say, hey, where did you start salary wise? Or, hey, what did you get bonus wise? You get comfortable doing it. You can share articles with people. You can share, salary reports from your industry. You can also be a giver. You don't just have to ask, can I have your number, right? I just want to say, Ruchika, you shared so many great nuggets with us in such a short time. When I look at your work, I think to myself, it takes so much courage to challenge CEOs and cultures and norms that are like as old as the sun. And that's what you're doing. So thank you for being that mirror for so many companies and making such great noise that we need, around some of these topics to say, do better, keep doing better. In the show notes, everyone, you're going to see some links to Ruchika's great work, her book, her social channels. She's so authentic and real in her social channels, and the mediums where you can reach her. So follow her website, and her articles too. I think you have one coming out really soon, a new one for HBR. So watch out for that. I hope you'll stay in touch with me too. Check out my LinkedIn learning courses about being that fierce self-advocate every day at work, showing all the way up with confidence. I hope you'll join my newsletter and follow me here on LinkedIn if you're not already. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ruchika, community. I hope you'll all pull others up with you as you go and lead on. Oh, so do you. So do you. Mutual Admiration Society here. Keep pulling people up while you go for it, while you make those bold bets on yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you.
Bye.